All right, great. All right, everybody, welcome to the January 12th Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. This meeting is being held entirely remotely with all participants participating via Zoom. So they're on the call with us. I ask that everybody on the call, please keep your phone or device muted so that you're not picked up by minutes or the recording and you're not distracting in any way. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand. I'm going to ask virtually because I have two screens and that'll move you to the front of the queue so that I can call on you. Please wait to be called on before speaking. If you have a relationship to the project, if you're in a butter, please state that before you speak and make sure any comments stay under the Wetlands Protection Act and our bylaw, things that would be within our purview. So with that, and I will begin tonight's meeting under public meeting, public comment on items not being heard this evening. Is there any public comment? I'm not seeing any public comment, so we'll move on to the public hearing. We have notice of intent, Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, 41 through 119 Baxter Road, SE 483598. And I know we received email correspondence requesting a withdrawal. I'm not sure if the applicant wants to speak to that or just have commissioners go at it. No one's going to volunteer. I don't know. Commissioners, all we need to do is make a motion to accept the withdrawal at this point. So if there are no questions or comments, would somebody like to make that motion? Motion made by Joe. Is there a second? Seconded by Ian. So by roll vote, Beal.
Aye.
Engelborg.
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding.
Aye.
Mizzarelli. Oh, I couldn't hear you, Mike. I'll go around. Plandowski.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
I can see you raising your hand. Is that a thumbs up? Yes. So we're getting a thumbs up vote yes from Mike. So that motion carries unanimously.
I'm telling you, modern technology.
I know. It always throws hiccups when you don't expect it. So that moves us on in the public meeting. We have the SE 2824 geotube removal enforcement order, discussion of extension request. I know we received information from SBPF on Monday, and I believe they have individuals to speak to that information. But if
Yes. Good evening, Chairwoman. This is Meredith Moldenhauer on behalf of SBPF. We present to you tonight, obviously with sincere regret that we're at this point discussing the removal of the geotube. SBPF had previously asked for ways to rectify the deficiencies in the geotube system that had been proven successful. Was not submitted any agreement on those aspects, and no such requests were rejected. Compliance options would have allowed it to be maintained and sustained, but delay has consequences and the decision was needed, and thus, as you mentioned earlier, the NOI was withdrawn, and now we are here tonight before you to discuss the removal of the geotubes. We asked multiple times for the removal order to be held back or to be postponed. Your letters and responses, we believe, were very clear. The commission has required the removal and instructed us to present this plan. So SBPF engaged Mark Haley of H&A to provide professional consulting in connection with the removal plan. We filed that plan, and we apologize, late Friday, and it sounds like you got it on Monday morning, which is great. H&A is a regional leader of geotechnical firm with a national reputation. H&A has more than 800 environmental and engineering consultants with diverse services, geographical, and industrial expertise in this matter. Mark has specific experience on the bluff dating back to 2013 when he provided an assessment to the town's Department of Public Works regarding the public safety of the road following a major storm. Tonight, we'll ask the commission for you to instruct SBPF on how to proceed with the removal. It will require for you, the commission, to determine whether a new NOI needs to be filed in connection with the removal order, or if an amendment to the E&O is another option or a path. Before I turn it over to Mark to present to you, we are also joined tonight by Jamie Feely, who is responsible for operating and maintaining the GO2 project. He has been a part of the process and is here to answer questions if they come up that may be more within his purview and experience. Mark Haley will present the plan and provide more context regarding the removal, but it is also critical to note the high levels of uncertainty that are involved in the plan. I'll turn it over to Mark. I know he has a presentation and he'll probably be sharing his screen, and we'll be available for questions.
See, that's all you are. Okay.
Thank you, Meredith. And everybody who's on the call who's not speaking, can you make sure that you're muted? And Mark Haley, will give it over to you.
And I can use my screen, Ashley.
Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. What I'm going to do is just review, just for the commission and yourself, is the as-built plan from 2013. I'll just correct. I've been involved in the bluffs here at Sconset Beach since when they put in a beach dewatering system in probably early 2000s. And then we used terraces in the 2007 range. And then in 2013, we started looking at the geotubes. So I've been involved in the bluffs here at Sconset for many years now. Anyway, with that, this is the as-built plan of the geotubes as they existed at the time of the as-built. And essentially it's about 860 feet plus or minus. Can you hear
Mark,
me?
sorry to interrupt you. Are you currently screen sharing?
Yes, I plan to be. Just 1 second, let me back up. Let me go to more. Screen share, sorry about that.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that if you wanted to screen share that we were.
I was, let me tell you, Ashley, tell me if this comes up. Can you see my screen now?
We cannot.
You still
There's a
can't.
button, I think, on the bottom or somewhere on our side.
It was, and I went to it, it said more, and it said share screen. No, it didn't. Host disabled participants screen sharing. So you need to make me a co-host, I think, Ashley.
Jeff will need to do that because I'm actually not running the back part of this meeting.
All right, try now, please.
Okay. There you go. Now you should see my screen.
Yes, it's coming up.
Coming up. You got it.
Yes, so we see like your background and you just need to
Yeah.
open the document.
Yeah, I'm going to open that right now. So I'm opening a document, which is the as-built plan for the geotubes location, which exist about 800 and something feet along this in a parallel to bluff. And at the north end, it has a return that's a short return of about 25 feet. And the other side, it has about 70 feet of return. But that's essentially what we're talking about. And what these look like in cross section is essentially at the southerly end, they consist of 4 geotubes stacked in a angled form. Lowest tube is here, and then they added a 4th tube up in here. So you have 4 tubes. These tubes are about 20 foot wide by about 7 foot high. They place them on the beach and then they fill them with sand and water by pumping sand into the tube. The water passes through the geotextile material that creates the tube, and you're left with essentially a very large sandbag. They then set the next tube on top and they create this cascading tow revetment, a tow stability structure that essentially sits at the bottom of the bank. What Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund did then is put additional sand on the base of the dune or the base of the bank to essentially allow them to plant native plantings from the top of the geotube elements up to the top of the bluff. And that's what essentially exists today. In addition, one of the we're going to talk about is they also installed at the Brackett Road, which is at the low point of Brackett Road, ponding of water was occurring, flowing across the ground, over the crest of the bluff, and down behind the geotubes. What they ended up doing is putting in a catch basin, horizontal pipe out to the edge of the dune, and a vertical pipe. They replaced a 4-inch, which is sloped down the face of the dune, down to behind the geotubes, where they have a horizontal or a lateral spreader that essentially allows the water to go in and infiltrate in behind the geotubes. So that essentially prevents water from cascading and eroding the face of the dune during rain events. If there's any questions of what the current geometry is, and then I'll move on. Any questions? Not hearing any. Ashley, if you'd help, if you see a hand come up, just tell me.
Yes, I will let you know. I can see the commissioners and everybody's listening to the presentation.
Great, thank you. Okay. So the next, what I'd like to talk about is what I recommended be done before we remove the tubes. And this is a letter report that all the commissioners should have received in their packet last Friday. And it provides a little bit of background that I just went through. And what I have recommended in it is that, and Meredith talked about this a little bit, is first is, does this work of removal require a new notice of intent, or would it be done under an amendment to the removal order? And that's something the commission needs to provide to SBPF, and we'll go from there. So the next is, I recommend that we look at the existing structures between the town and the owners of the existing structures that are at top of the bluff, because when this geotubes are removed, those structures will be in danger potentially of having erosion occur on the bluff, undermining their houses because they're so close to the edge of bluff today. And that we need to understand what the impacts of the removal would be on those structures. In addition, if they have to be removed and moved back, that's the longest timeline. We'll talk about timeline a little bit later on. That's the longest timeline to have those removed. The next would be once this is removed, and back to what Meredith was indicating in 2013, when I met one of the select board members at that time, I recommended if the top of bluff gets within 25 feet of Baxter Road, the town needs to think about removing the utilities or potentially even closing the road to traffic and cars because of the potential collapse of a road, especially during a storm event. So that's the kind of the third bullet. And right now the geotubes, they range from about 31 to 53 feet. But I think once these tubes are removed and the washed sand erodes at a faster rate, that could get to 25 feet relatively quickly. The last one is, and we're checking on this now, whether or not they already have this agreement or not, but they would need to provide a staging area at the beach club, which would be the access to the beach for equipment, to bring equipment down the beach to get to the work area in front of the houses at Baxter Road. Any questions? Nope. Okay. So I then proceeded to say, okay, one of the things that I looked at first is safety. safety for the people who live above it and on the bluff, safety of the workers that are essentially having to remove this. I went out to and talked to a number of contractors here in the Boston area that work in the marine environment and got their different opinions. And believe me, each one had a different opinion. And I tried to synthesize those into the three options that I'm presenting. Option 2 and 3 are very similar. It just is a different direction that we'd be removing the tubes. But we'll go into each one in a little bit of detail. Option 1 is essentially natural. I call it the natural processes. We go in and remove the sand from the upper tube where there's 4 existing. We remove that and we would cut the front face of that tube, the geotube, allowing the sand to start to spill out of that tube. And as storm events occur, it'll continue to wash the sand out of the tubes until the geotube fabric is exposed. The contractor would then come in and remove the fabric, and we would do the same thing, remove the sand from the 3rd layer, cut the sides of the tube, and let nature take its course and allow this to essentially decay. On Cape Cod, where I've done a number of marine revetments and geotube installations, of seen them being done, is what tends to occur is they decay over time because they don't keep them covered. And once they are exposed and they in fact have a hole, the wave action essentially takes the sand out from inside of the tube, but the tube itself stays in place because of its weight. It doesn't float, and it will remain in place so the contractor can then go out and pick up that tube and take the remains off the site for disposal, either on island or off island. But this process in option 1, which is what the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund would like you to consider first, is essentially, it's a longer process, but it allows us to evaluate the condition of the bank and how the bank is in fact changing over time as the different layers of the geotubes are removed. Any questions on option 1? Okay. Option 2. Option 2 is going in with a backhoe, excavating around the upper tube. So we would be down at the south end of the site, starting there, and we remove the sand that's covering the tubes today, cut the top tube, and then excavate out the material, side casting the sand that's within the tube to the side onto the beach, and removing the fabric, cutting it and removing it off the beach. You'd probably do somewhere in the around 100 foot at a time, or maybe less, but you just essentially move from south to north, removing the entire upper tier of geotube. You then move back to the south and do the same thing on the 3rd tier, removing the geotubes as you go all the way. Now you're going from all the way from the south end all the way to the north end, all 800 and plus or minus feet. The last tube, which is the most difficult, is currently the grades on the beach are in the 7 to 8 range, and or 9 to 10 range maybe even, whereas the bottom of the tube is much lower. So that tube is going to need to have to work high to allow you to get that tube and the materials out of it and excavate it, because you're going to be excavating close to or below mean low water, mean high water. So that exercise will be much more difficult. All of this work in both options, in fact, all of the options, want to be done in the summer months, because the beach is wider and you don't want to be out there during a winter storm. You'll have to get all your equipment off the beach. So the time to do this essentially was when they also, I believe, built it, was during the more spring, summer, and fall months, not the winter time. Okay, the 3rd option, which is very similar to option 2. However, in this option, the equipment would come in and do sections of about 40 foot in width, but they'd work perpendicular to the slope. The one contractor that I talked to, why he wanted to do this is because once he removes the first 40 feet, he can then, as he's going for the second 40 feet, he can side cast the material that he's excavating to the hole that he just excavated to remove the first piece. And you'd also only be opening up 40 foot of bank at a time, and you're replacing or replenishing the sand within and in front of, at the toe of the slope. So when you finish, you essentially have recreated what's all with all the sand that's there now, somewhat of a toe replenishment, if you will, of the toe, but all the geotubes will now have been removed. And each of those, at least based on early scheduling, is a 2 to 3 month process for either option 2 or 3. With that, I'm going to switch to the timeline in which I tried to put together. And I kind of looked at it and said, okay, if we go to the town and we figure out what we need to do, if we do an NOI, we prepare more detailed plans in my concept letter that I provided you today, and prepare an NOI, have the hearings, and maybe it's in the 3.5 month time frame. Amended enforcement order would still require, I think, the same drawings, and you can help us on that. And then it could be submitted and you could issue it. That would take less time, maybe a month and a half to execute that. At the same time, and these can be overlapping, the structural house assessment would be undertaken over the first 2 to 3 month time frame to assess what these houses and what has to happen. If the conclusion is that those houses need to be removed or moved back from the bank, then that is estimated to take somewhere between 6 to 7 months, getting you out to about 9.5 months from now. And that's the big piece of this construction. So sorry about that. The DPW Baxter Road assessment can be done at the same time as the house assessment. So those would be in the first couple months. Beach staging would also be in the same time. So that all of these, to get everything underway to ready to go, as long as the houses did not have to be changed, you should be able to be working sometime in the 2 to 3 month time frame, which puts us into a time where it's starting to get into the spring environment and you'll be able to potentially start construction. Option 1, as we said, would be excavating with equipment, the material that's on over only the top tube, the 4th stack, and cutting it, and that let nature take its course. And when that occurs, it'll depend upon how many storms occur and how fast that sand is washed out of that tube. Option 2 and 3, which we've now concluded is somewhat similar to either one, is going to be somewhere in the 2 to 3 month time frame is the way this is currently written out. I've said from 3 to 6 months. So somewhere in that time frame, either one of those. And if anything, we would request of the commission that if we decide to go with option 2 or 3, we'd like 2 or 3 to both be on the table. Let the economics, as we talk to additional contractors and we bid out and can contract for this work, allow either one of these processes to be undertaken. And it may in fact be a hybrid depending upon how the contractor wants to approach it. But the activities are pretty much the same, as you're going to be out on the beach with equipment, cutting the tube, removing sand, side casting the sand that you removed, and placing it on the toe of the existing slope in the areas where the tubes have been removed. With that, I'll turn it over for questions. Ashley.
Thank you, Mark. When you stop screen sharing, I'll go to questions, and I do see some commissioner hands up.
Okay, stop sharing. You got it.
Thank you. Ian, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Haley. Was any consideration given to removing the top 2 tiers and then applying to keep the remaining 2 tiers with sand on them, and to see if that would add more sand to the littoral system during a storm?
I did not evaluate that, but it certainly could be done, and I think it might be a good solution, Ian, to remove the top 2, and you probably want to remove those both at the same time, and then cover the lower 2 with sand. What we did look at is it possible to leave the lowest one in place because it's so difficult to remove today, but it can be done.
Great. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
So Joe, I saw your hand go up.
Yes. I hope we are not being asked to select an option. This,
No, we would recommend an option to you. I just wanted to lay out the various options that are there. And what I indicated was the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund would recommend right now to the commission to undertake option 1.
the reason I say that is this is a very dangerous job, in my opinion.
We agree.
Removing those sandbags, particularly the last one probably, could be a potential problem.
And Joe, that's exactly why one of the contractors looked at trying to do it perpendicular to the bluff as opposed to parallel, because his equipment now would be, if there was a slide, the slide would be in front of his equipment and in front of his workers, as opposed to he would be working parallel it, the slide would come down and bury his equipment. That's exactly one of the reasons why they went that direction. Does that make sense to you, Joe?
It does. I read your letter twice. And after reading it the second time, I was more afraid of this whole project than the first time. And I say that I have a degree in engineering, and at one time was a licensed professional engineer in New York State. And I've learned enough in that whole process to know that you better have somebody who really knows what they're doing, who's going to be working on this project. Otherwise, not only will you have a problem down at the beach level, but up where the homes are.
Agree totally. And one of the things we would want to do is we expand and put more details or more meat on the bone here, Joe, would be to come up with a monitoring program for the bank itself. So we'd be monitoring what is the bank undergoing as this work at the toe is being undertaken. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And we will weigh all these options, probably get some independent review on this, before any decisions are made, Joe. Seth, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Haley, for your presentation. So starting with kind of the logistic question, I'm of the opinion that we don't need a new notice of intent to proceed with this process. The enforcement order that we have, is fully designed to effectuate removal. That was the purpose of the order. And we could just, accept additional engineering plans, additional drawings, additional documentation on how that would be done in a safe way without requiring a new notice of intent.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
Oh, Seth, you muted yourself.
No, someone else muted me, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
That's my personal opinion on that matter. In terms of the options for what the removal process could be, although I certainly understand option 1 as being possibly the safest for the contractors doing the work, I'm worried that it's not very precise. I'm definitely worried about, the ability of the geotextile fabric, once cut open and exposed, to rip apart and wash into the ocean there, cause potential pollution. Also, in big storms, a large amount of sand could slide out in one area and change the beach topography there. So I think there's some issues on that end with option 1. I think, option 2, in my opinion, seems really unsafe. So if I had to pick, I would like to see option 3 go forward. But possibly there's some combination of options that we could take at different locations along the bank that could depend on the profile of the bank there. And then lastly, just quickly related to the assessment of structures. I think it's pretty well documented in this project that there are only two occupied dwellings within the project layout. So it's pretty well known already what the structures are. Maybe we would benefit from some analysis of the vulnerability of those structures, but I honestly think it's a little bit mutually exclusive. And I don't think we can require removal of those structures within this enforcement process. Any demolition or relocation of those structures would require a new notice of intent that is somewhat separate from this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Mike, I'll go to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Got my microphone issue solved. Sorry about that. As far as the new notice of intent, I would, defer to Jeff and Ashley, what our plan there is. And, as far as the removal order goes, this has been in place for 9 years or so. I wouldn't expect that we would be making a decision tonight. I certainly would like to get a lot more information on the options and how we proceed going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, I agree with almost everything commissioners have said so far. I know, when this project first went in, there was town engineers that looked at it, and they essentially said that the way the geotubes went in and the angle of repose of the bluff, they weren't in fact stabilizing the top of that bluff. So they didn't make that house that's perched on the top any safer or less safe. So I would say it's as precarious as it was beforehand. And those owners should be assessing their property regardless of the geotubes down below, just because that's a very dynamic bluff edge that they're on. I just lost my second train of thought, and it was about something Mike had said, but I'll go back to it. Jeff, your hand's been up.
But Ashley, could I make a comment on what you just said on the people evaluating their own homes? Just
Yep.
add to it. The concern I have is once the geotubes are removed, the material they placed above the geotubes, which they did their plantings on, is a double wash sand, and they also use that same sand within the geotubes. That's going to be more erodible or highly erodible as opposed to the natural sands within the bluff itself, which has a lot of more finer grain material. The clays is a clay bluff in one area, so that my fear is that slope will go back to almost a near vertical slope as it was before the geotubes went in and they refilled along the top of them and then did their planting. So yes, these were precarious 9 years ago, but because the geotubes have been there, I don't think they've gotten any worse. But once we remove the geotubes, they will go back to being where they were very precarious before. Does that make sense to you, Ashley?
It does. I guess just from standing up on the bank at that one house, I didn't feel safe with the geotubes there or not. So, but again, that's for that homeowner. Jeff, your hand had been up.
Yeah, I was just gonna hop in really quickly and answer one of Mike's questions that he just came up. And I think our staff recommendation would be to proceed through the enforcement order and not go through a separate notice of intent process. I think that's it. The process is designed to be able to bring it to conclusion through the EO and not require anything else. And I think that would be a wise step in this case. I was also going to say too, we were talking about it, and actually you already mentioned it. We can still have, we have a third-party reviewer that we can use. I know some of the engineering and obviously construction safety aspects may not be in Mr. Birdman's wheelhouse or expertise, but we can certainly track down someone to provide a review of this proposal in those aspects as well. I don't think it'd be difficult. I'm sure between that and DEP, we can probably find someone to provide that review if that's something you guys are interested in. Obviously don't have a time frame for what that would take. But But I definitely think we could provide that level of review for you all to have and make a decision.
Thank you, Jeff. Mark, I see your hand up, and then Joe, I'll go to you, and then Ian, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Two things. I watched the Board of Selectmen last night, and Town Council Pucci, at response to a question, said, in his opinion, they don't need to apply for an NOI if we so decide. It's up to the Conservation Commission to waive that requirement if we want to. On another topic, Mr. Haley, would there be any benefit in us recommending keeping the drainage that works on top of the bluff to keep the rainwater and other water from going down over the bank? That drainage is in place now, and not really a part of the geotube. Is there any merit in considering that?
Yeah, in fact, in my report, Mark, is I put in that someone should look at whether or not, instead of it going over the bank uncontrolled, we bring it back to the west across Baxter, or ideally leave it where it is until, if it starts to become exposed and the pipes start to have to come off, then you'll have to pick up the pipe and take it away. But there's no reason to just go in today and take it away.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Joe, your hand had been up.
Yes, I wanted to also add that we should be reasonable on the amount of time it's going to take to do this, so that it's done correctly and it's done safely, versus saying it has to be out in 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. If it happens to take 7, 8, or 9 months, I would say so be it. Thank you.
Yes, I have to agree with you there that we want to be safe. I do, however, have some concerns just because of the letter that was sent by SPPF. So like option 1, that might take a few years, with them saying that they might walk away from some of this stuff. I realize they agreed to the removal. It just makes me a little bit nervous about plans that take potentially years to get this out. But safety is obviously a main concern for workers and the bank. Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So without driving the subject into the ground, this may be a procedural question for Jeff. And assuming that my fellow commissioners would have some interest in considering a modified design that would introduce more sand into the littoral system during nor'easters, would the town have to come before us with a new NOI to modify the design, or is it within our purview to consider and order the design to be modified? And if so, who would do it? Since SPPF is bowed out, that would be the town's responsibility, I assume, as the leaseor and the property owner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great questions, Ian. Jeff, do you have any ideas? Thoughts?
I definitely would want to double check this. I think my initial impression, obviously, if you're taking over the maintenance of a modified structure, I think the enforcement order is very specific, and then the order that was put through court was for removal of the structure as it exists. I think modification and further operation of the structure in a different form would definitely have to be, permitted through a normal permitting process. I don't think that, changing the content of the removal order from what was initially ordered to modified design and operation would make sense under the EO. I'll definitely double check that, but I think if the operator was going to change to the modified structure, that a new order of conditions from a notice of intent would probably be the most prudent path for, if you're suggesting that the bottom two stay to take over the operation and maintenance of those two. The removal of the top two still may be available through the EO, but I think if that was an option that was presented, I think we would definitely want to make sure we run that through council of some degree to be sure that everything is T's crossed and I's dotted for that.
And if I may, Madam Chair, with a follow-up question.
Yep, go
which
ahead.
I suppose would to do with the escrow, because one wouldn't want to jeopardize the purposes of the escrow, which is there both to remove, and my understanding is that we still have the issue of the 60,000 cubic yards, the deficit. And so I suppose going forward, could the escrow be used to make up that deficit, which I would see would be wrapped in to the modification question. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say with that too, I mean, I'll definitely kick the tires on that a little bit harder. I was gonna kind of save this for later if it didn't come up, but I think before that option's even considered, and one of our staff recommendations through this process too is I still think there's a worthwhile opportunity for this board to sit down with the select board and try to find some common goals for the area now that kind of the parameters of this have all changed around. And seeing if that's something that they're interested in doing, or, you know, if they're more supportive of removal. But I definitely think this presents an opportunity to try to establish those common goals between the select board and the Conservation Commission. And I think that would be a worthwhile exercise. And obviously before the town would even consider taking that over, you know, we would on obviously some engineering review and operation planning and some sort of funding mechanism. So I think that would be kind of a long road to travel, but I think that would be a really interesting discussion to have with the select board.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. And thank you, Jeff, for throwing out the select board joint meeting. I do think I agree it would be a wise idea. I as well watched the select board meeting last night, and I think that they need to maybe be still brought up to speed a little bit in this area, and then to discuss kind of common goals in the process moving forward. So that's great. Linda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was in agreement with, I think it was Joe earlier, that we need to be very careful how long it takes and when it is done. And if it takes 9 months or a year, I'm happy. And I was interested in Ian's question about modifications. And so I think I'd like to hear the answer to that at some point, but I also figure if they suggest option 1 and it takes 9 months, I'm all there. So I'm not, I've said it before, I'm not one of those that wants them jerked out right now just because. So if the options to protect, at least for safety of the workmen, as well as coming up with some options on top of that bluff, I'm all there.
Thank you, Linda. And I hope people don't think I'm suggesting they just need to be ripped out. I just know in that option 1, I think it said 9 months and potentially a couple of years, unless I misread that. So that was my concern.
If I can add to that, Ashley, this is Mark Haley, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
It'll really depend upon the storms, especially on the upper levels, the 4th level of geotubes. And I've had this discussion with Jamie Feely and some people on the board, is that the typical storm event you get splash up at the 4th geotube level, but you don't get a lot of wave action unless you have a very large storm. So that 4th level is going to take some time. And I talked about whether or not we try to go after the 4th and the 3rd at the same time, because the 3rd does in fact get washed, which will allow the water to come out. 2 levels, 1 and 2, though, what I understand is the storms come up and over that, and there'll be significant wash if we just leave those 2 in place. Someone will have to add more sand at a more rapid time frame than what you do today. And maybe you can hear from other people that know more about that section of the beach, because you're there.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And I am aware that the sand doesn't usually wash off the template off that 4th tube. So I think it could be quite a lengthy amount of time before it drained out naturally. Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know this is a complicated project, and I think it's important to kind of make sure we're working within the bounds of what's what. So as Jeff said, you know, the enforcement order we have that we issued and then was affirmed by Superior Court is for removal. And if we try to do anything to modify that order to, you know, seek the applicant to modify the structure somehow, we have to be really careful that we're not undermining the legitimacy of that order. I think there are alternative pathways if the commission is interested in seeking modifications to the structure for those to play out. You know, the order of conditions for this project, by my understanding, is still active. So the applicant could submit an amended order of conditions request to consider, you know, any modification to the structure, or they could submit a new notice of intent for the current for, you know, something in the area of the current structure. I know they just withdrawn their notice of intent for an extended project this meeting, so maybe there's not an interest in submitting more notice of intents, but there are alternative pathways for modification of structures within this section of Sconset Bluff. But we have to make sure that we're not, you know, delegitimizing the current enforcement order and, you know, sort of coagulating things together, because that order is really specific to removal. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Dwight Dunk, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, actually, my comments were actually, I'm now going to be basically repeating Mr. Haley and Commissioner Engelborg. You know, what I was going to comment on is really that the enforcement order is removal, you know, not modification, not changing, but removal. So I think that's what the enforcement order covers, and that's all 4 tiers, and that's what's been proposed. The design up to that height was designed by professional engineers based on models of wave action and wave run up. So, you know, modifying it to a lower tier to just have those 2 tiers would have significant wave overwash, run up and overwash during storms. Basically not making them much of a tow protection function. You know, that's why they were designed to the height they were. So I just wanted to, you know, as Commissioner Engelborg said, that the enforcement order was for removal. That's what's been proposed under the existing enforcement order. And then what Mr. Haley was saying is the overwash. So I think if there was to be a modification, that would need to be designed by somebody who was willing to present an engineered design that would stabilize the bluff at a lower with a protection system at a lower elevation. And, you know, you'd need somebody that's willing to, you know, design that and stamp that.
Thank you. Ian, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I respectfully disagree with Dr. Dunk about that 2 tiers would be overtopped all the time. Because in fact, I've been going out there on a regular basis after every major storm. I have photographic evidence after every major storm. And I'm happy to provide the photographs that show that the water basically almost never got up to the top of the 3rd tier. And so I think that a modified design with enough sand on top of 2 tiers would add the sand deficit that is necessary. In other words, to mimic the up to 40, 50, 60 cubic yards per linear foot that actually can be taken out of the bluff on the 3rd day of a 3-day nor'easter. And That is my personal observation. And as you know, we had a house there for nearly 40 years at number 99. So I have some experience. And in fact, the picture on my screensaver is the third day of a nor'easter in the late 1980s, Dwight. So I do feel that there could be a design that would do both, but I certainly would agree that in terms of the existing structure is basically designed to make sure that there is that the bluff remains inviolate. And so we've all seen the tremendous end scar from the lack of sand that has gone into the littoral system during storms. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. And Ian, I know I agree. It's like very tempting to think about modifying this structure. But I do agree with Seth and Mr. Dunk that right now we're talking about the removal enforcement, and especially with SBPF statements that they're going to walk away. I think we do need to respect that aspect, you know, and help them move forward with a removal plan. I think, however, a conversation with the select board about potential modifications to the structure might be worthwhile, because it sounds like this project might be in their hands, in which case we could discuss with them if they wanted to do some alternate path forward in this area.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And I certainly wasn't trying to imply that I fully understand the implications of the removal order. So I will say no more on the subject of alteration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any other questions or comments? Search the screen. So, Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but just procedurally wondering where this would take us. Would we be having to make a motion to extend the removal and have our meetings with the select board in the next phases?
I think ultimately, yes. I think my feeling is we should probably ask staff, I don't know that we need a motion for this, but to send these options to Greg Berman, our independent reviewer. And then because I don't feel that anybody would be ready to pick an option tonight, I think that would require a motion to extend the removal for, another date to discuss this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? Jeff?
Sorry, I should have used my digital hand for you. I was just going to suggest, if that is the, kind of the prerogative of the group here, to maybe extend to one of our actual regular meeting dates. And if it looks like there's going to be a really significant discussion at that point, to then maybe, set a date for a special discussion to make sure everyone has the information. I would definitely encourage people to submit any comments or thoughts that they have on these in writing already. And then seeing where we, kind of where we go from there schedule wise. So I have the schedule in front of me if people want dates at some point, but I'll leave that up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't seeing any other questions or comments, so I think we are at that point to maybe discuss future scheduling.
Sure. So obviously our next regular meeting is January 19th. I give that a 0.0% chance to get this sent off and get information back by that meeting. I would suggest maybe today is the 12th. We do have a meeting on February 2nd or February 16th. I think I would personally, given timeframes, would probably feel better about the 16th. Because I would give a month to get it off, get it reviewed, get it back to you guys. Get any questions or get any other comments from everyone else in time for that. But if you guys feel that you want the closer meeting, that's certainly possible as well.
The only reason I would say the closer meeting is just to make sure that the progress is being made. I guess I was maybe surprised that we didn't have more robust information about these options tonight for our kind of consumption. So I want to make sure that, you know, if we wait until the 16th, everything would be in for us. Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And although I respect your opinion, I think that from when we've sent things off to our third-party reviewer in the past, it's been like a minimum 3-week turnaround. So I think we can direct SPPF and the town to continue working on building out the specifics of these proposals. But I think we're going to get to February 2nd and ask for another continuance to the 16th at that point anyways. So I'm in favor of, you know, the 16th timeline. I would just say too, and Jeff hit on this before, you know, we have the ability as the Conservation Commission to use whatever third-party reviewer we deem fit. And although we've had great experience with Mr. Berman in the past, geotechnical engineering is not necessarily his background area. So I would direct staff to possibly consider alternatives for this specific proposal as well.
Thank you, Seth. Those are good points. Jeff, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and not to try to pressure anyone towards the later date, that may also give the opportunity, since you guys have expressed the interest, and I know the select board still has, of having that joint meeting, to have that in between. It may give some chance to get some reactions or some comments from that as well.
Right.
Remember that?
So at this point, Jeff, we don't need a motion to get this independently reviewed, correct? Okay. I want, again, to make sure there's no questions or comments. Mark Haley, I see your hand up.
Yes, Ashley, Mr. Chairman, is if the peer reviewer starts to get into it, I'm sure the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund would not have a problem with me consulting with him to make sure he understands where I was coming from. So we could have a consult, if you will, if he's willing to do that. I'm offering that to you.
Thank you for offering that. That will probably be helpful just to understand the ideas behind your options. He might have those questions. So thank you very much.
That assistance always expedites reviews, so much appreciated.
Yeah. So then at this point, it sounds like the later date is the more favorable date for people. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, I don't think I've missed any. Oh, Meredith.
Oh, I just want to make sure you're not looking for us to provide you anything else between this time frame. You're going to be conducting your third-party review. Mr. Haley has made himself available and will come back at that point in time in February to discuss. I just want to make sure we're very clear on kind of if SBPF is required to do anything in between.
I think you should be talking to these contractors, you know, and having that true information for us on the second.
But we can't do that until we determine which option we're going with.
Okay. Commissioners, do we want any more information from them, or do we just want to kind of direct them based on our independent review, et cetera? All right. So it looks like we don't need anything from you unless maybe Mr. Haley would make himself available for our independent reviewer if there's questions.
And I will.
Okay. All right, so commissioners, we would need to make a motion to extend the removal discussion until February 16th.
So move, Madam Chair.
Jeff
Can I-
has to give 1 second, Jeff.
I would say if you would be amenable, Linda, your motion should be to extend the discussion to February 16th and also extend the removal order to February 16th as well.
That's my motion.
Motion made by Linda. Is there a second? seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Can I ask a procedural question? Sorry.
yep, go ahead.
So if we get to February 16th, which is the removal date, and we're having the meeting on that same date, then can we, on February 16th, continue it further? It's February 16th at midnight is the removal date, I'm assuming.
Yes, you guys have the right to, especially as the enforcing authority, to extend that date as needed.
Okay.
Another procedural question, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If there is a nor'easter, no power, et cetera, I'm afraid to continue it to a date on the date we're supposed to meet. Would it not be more advantageous to continue it to February 28th or some other meeting date like that to not box ourselves in, given how the weather can do whatever the hell it wants?
I don't think I understand how the weather plays in, because even tonight, it was all continued until like this date today.
I know, and that concerned me the last time, because I've been through this on other boards, where if we continue it to a meeting, and for whatever reason that meeting doesn't take place, then the order is standing and it can't be continued because we didn't give it any time to have another meeting in case something happens. That's the only reason I'm concerned about that.
I don't know. That's a good question for Jeff. That's a regular meeting night.
I mean, I think if you wanted to stick it to a regular meeting, you could certainly continue the discussion to February 16th and continue the removal order. The need for removal to March 9th, because the following meeting after that. And if you got to the 16th, you could always continue it again.
I think that's what I'm after, is to go ahead and continue the discussion to our next meeting on the 16th. And the removal order to our meeting in March, and that'll, if some catastrophe happens, we have some room.
Okay, Seth's hands up. Now we've got a lot of questions within this motion.
Sorry, I'm in favor of that, not even just like weather related, but what if we can't get a quorum on the 16th, or who knows what happens? I don't want the motion to just die. So if we want to extend it to a regular meeting night, fine. Or if we just want to extend it to a random date with the ability to always schedule a special meeting, that's fine too. If we don't want to wait till March 9th, we could say like, okay, let's extend the removal order to February 25th or whatever it is.
That's school vacation. I'm sorry, I'm axing that one.
No, I'm not actually saying that date. I'm just
That's what
saying.
I'm saying March.
I'm just saying, theoretically, it doesn't have to be that same meeting schedule, but I'm in favor if people are willing to extend the discussion to the 16th and the removal order to March 9th, because even if we have a excellent discussion on the 16th, they're not going to be able to have a shovel-ready plan to remove it that same day, so.
All right, I just want to remove the technical problem.
Okay, and then Mark has a question, and then we're gonna have to amend that motion, it sounds like. Mark, go ahead.
No, I think that's a good idea to have the 16th be the discussion and the March 9th be the enforcement order end date. That makes infinite sense.
Okay. So Linda, would you like to amend your motion?
And what am I, no, continue the discussion to February 16th, and then what?
And then continue the
Enforcement
removal order for March 9th.
That's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. By roll vote, Beal,
All right.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
Mizzarelli,
Aye.
Landowski,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Great, that carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and all the work that's gone into this, and everybody who's following along. There are a lot of people on this Zoom call. So commissioners, we still need to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
I think Joe got you. So I'm gonna Joe the motion and you the second. So roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Landowski,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
You.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.